what motivation is, what we looked at while understanding motivation. We'll go through motivation, the cycle of motivation, and how we can understand thirst and hunger. So when we start when we start with motivation, one of the first things that we start with is understanding the concept. Now, I'm sure all of you have come across the understanding of with motivation. We can look at, or when we look at different factors, it is associated with words such as drive, needs. It's associated with such as intrinsic or internal, extrinsic or external. It has also been associated with words such as goals, desires. So there are so many words that come into mind when we're talking about motivation. So when we're looking at motivation, one of the first important, just a second, if you the classmates are joining in. So when we first look at motivation, one of the first key aspects for us to consider is that it is the need within the individual to do something or fulfill a desire. There are a lot of lenses through when we look at motivation, right? You have the psychosens, all of them understand that when we're talking about psychological needs as well, which come from the psychodynamic perspective. We're also going to be looking at biological perspective today, where we're going to look at three needs. We're going to look at thirst and hunger. We're going to like just probably brush upon like sex as a motivation also, because we understand that it becomes a biogenic motive. We'll understand all of that in a little bit more detail. Very quickly, when we look at motivation, we understand that it is a desire to fulfill something that can be intrinsically or internally, or it could also be externally motivated. Here we also look at different kinds of motives. We look at biological motives, we look at psychological motives. I'm sure all of you have been introduced to psychological motives when we were looking at the TATs, and also when we've been looking at just psychodynamic perspective in general. However, when we move away and understand biologically, in order for us to survive as species, we require certain innate intrinsic motives to exist in order for survival to happen, right? So when we look at those innate biological motives, three of them come to mind, that is hunger, thirst and sex. When we look at all of this, we're also trying to understand, how are we driven to basically meet that particular motive or meet that particular need that we have. Now every human being has this need, and it is a species behavior. Most species do have different types of needs that are necessary for that species to survive. So for us, even when we trace it back to evolution, we understand that survival is because of these three things. And if you again, when we try to look at all of this, we try to understand how there are certain brain areas, and also how do we understand this need, and how do we have structures or systems that are built into us to help us basically fulfill those needs. um, so when we look at motivation, motivation is the need within the individual to do something or fulfill a desire. So the first important characteristic for us to look at is that there is a need state that is created, right? So when you are hungry, you feel hunger. So there is a state, there is an internal body state that has to be created, and then we have a drive to reduce that need. So there is a need that is generated biologically. So when you're hungry, either your stomach growls, or you have hunger pangs, or you have a lot of different kinds of probably sensations in your stomach, or at least in your digestive tracts, which give you information that you're hungry. A lot of times it could also happen where you feel, well, let's just say, even if you've not eaten throughout the day, you might not feel hungry. However, you might feel more tired, more lethargic. So there are different ways through which our body itself is giving signals about the need. And then we have a drive to reduce that need. So there is something called as the motivation cycle that becomes very important for us to understand while we're looking at this relationship between the need state and and how we want to derive or we want to reduce this particular need. Now, when we are looking at these kind of needs, because we also look at psychological needs, there could also be our internal thoughts, our feelings, or there could also be internal bodily sensations, or there could be also external factors in the environment, which means that now that I'm talking about food, maybe you are not hungry. However, if I keep on saying food, 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 you probably might think about hunger. So that is also something where external stimulus, that is where if you see all of your food apps, like food delivering apps kind of make profit from, like constantly sending you or bombarding you with environmental stimuli, that is similar to the need that is there. So it creates a hoax need or a pseudo need which should not exist otherwise. Yes. So once the need exists, it basically indicates a state of arousal, or basically it makes our body more action ready, which means that when we're hungry, we're trying to search for food, or you also have sensations basically telling us that, hey, listen, we need to eat now. And also, when we are done, it also is like an internal state which tells us that I think we're full now. So, there are different mechanisms which actually bring about the state of arousal in maintaining that particular goal that we have. So, in like a very simple way of understanding motivation, would be looking at this motivation cycle. There is a need, there is an internal biogenic need. Biogenic is biological in nature. Then we are looking at the need is then moved on with a particular drive to fulfill that need, about the fact that we need to do something. Then that arousal leads us to a goal directed behavior. For example, let's just say if you're hungry, you want to grab something to eat, so you get something to eat as a goal directed behavior. You achieve that, then you feel more satiated, and then after a period of time, again. So, one of the important things to understand with this motivation cycle is also the fact that needs occur in a cycle, which means they occur again and again. They exist without even us wanting to have that need, which means that even if you don't usually feel hungry, you still need to eat. So the need will exist irrespective of conscious will, right? Obviously you can do things to not meet that need, by let's just say that going on to multiple fasts, not eating for days, even intermittent fasting. So all of these things could also be, maybe let's just say with hunger, not being able to meet that need, but still you do meet it at some point of time. So you can, by will or by conscious choice, is goal directed, but the need, the drive, the arousal all happen biologically. Okay, now they can be altered in different individuals. There are so many factors that affect this need of an individual, especially biological need. Now this is where one of the important things for us to understand is homeostasis. जब हम homeostasis की बात करते हैं, everybody's internal structure looks different. And another important thing to look at is, whenever we look at biological motives, one of the most important things that also control these motives are our hormones. Last time we had looked at a little bit about hormone regulation. We had looked at the hypothalamus, the role of hypothalamus. And another important gland we also consider is the pituitary gland. So pituitary gland, hypothalamus, ये दो work together in order to balance the entire hormonal structure or regulation in our systems. And these very highly affect all of the other homeostasis that happens in our body, which means that things such as you learned about circadian rhythms also. Circadian rhythms are also similar in terms of they have like the similar structure of moving across different time periods. So I think last time I remember Pranali talking about, like, where they also found that Sometimes it's 26-hour cycle, a 28-hour cycle has also been found. So where we're also seeing that homeostasis is also achieved, maintained differently, where for different individuals, based on geographic location, based on exposure to things, we see different ways in which this can also be altered. So even though it's biological, the way in which this need will be presented will also be a little bit more different. Okay, so many other internal factors, even individuals who have high levels of insulin, even individuals who have, for example, diabetes, for example, all of those will also affect the way in which we look at the biological motives that are being met, which means that even though for example, let's just say that if an individual has diabetes, we expect them to eat less food, right? Like not just sweets, but they're actually supposed to consume a very restricted form of diet. Now, even though the need exists and the drive exists and the arousal exists, the arousal can be altered over a period of time because of the insulin they take that is there to maintain that. So we are not just, when we are trying to look at these forms of treatment, especially with food, we are also looking at this as an important indicator of biological cycles being very important for biological motives. We'll also look at a little bit of this when we're looking at eating disorders, because I think this is very important for us to understand when we're going to be looking at eating disorders, of how disorders of because we are looking at a biological motive, right? So then how could this also be something that is curbed, or it could be seen excessive in certain individuals? So for now, we'll just look at this cycle and move to the other aspects of looking at what the cycle explains. Okay, we've looked at needs, we've looked at drives also. um, a lot of times we also have another important concept called as an incentive. Now, we all know kids need to eat, they feel hungry, however they do not always like to eat, right? So what do? You run around with them, you show them movies, you do something or the other, right? Like you're giving them incentive for them to literally survive. So that is what we are trying to do. A lot of times there are certain motives which have more incentive than others, and this could just be that the food or the, or let's just say there's something really good, like at night for dinner, you're really looking forward to it, which means that even if you're hungry, you're able to be like, I'm going to still keep on fasting properly. So or it could also be like an internal motive that I really need to fast. Or it could also be another thing. I'm sure now all of you have seen, right? There are these fancy waters which have like certain kinds of scent. They're just water, but you have these sippers which have like scents and taste just to drink water. So they're nothing but external incentives for you to meet your basic biological needs. So that is also something that we are looking at, that motivates our behaviors. So we see more of that behavior. A lot of times we also see with food, especially with hunger, it has been seen that in groups, people, if you are in a group which eats more, you're more likely to eat more, and if you're with a group that eats less, you're more likely to eat less. So it also shows that the group based behavior on what you order, what you eat, is also something that is influencing, which is all which are all external incentives. They're not something that exist within you. You still have the drive to eat, or the need to eat, but you still don't. Okay. Motives are nothing but general terms that we use in order to look at what the drives are and how we basically meet our goals, or what kind of actions do we take to reduce that particular need that we have. Now, a very important thing here to look at is that the regulation of motivated behavior is achieved through coordinated action of molecules. Now, because they're biological in nature, there has to be a system which gives information throughout the body. So usually when we look at food and when we look at water, there are two important functions. We know food gives us energy that is required for all of our functions to happen efficiently in the most simplest way possible. So that is what we are looking at. With water also, we're going to look at a little bit more about how water helps us function as human beings. So we also look at how there are different kinds of enzymes or also peptides that are present in our body that signal, maybe let's say, from different parts of our body, such as our digestive tracts, our intestines, our liver, our kidney, to give information to the brain about either the ingestion of food or water, and how there are several hormones released by the brain in order to tell us to drink more or not drink more. So we're going to look that give information, and also some that receive information to stop. So that is where we're looking at this coordinated action. Now, a lot of times, individuals who have lesions or individuals who have, let's just say, some problems in sending information or receiving information, we might see excessive eating in those individuals, or we might see that less of eating in individuals, especially with hunger. So, there is a very well understood circuit or circle of hunger. However, for thirst, that is not existing, which means that there is a lot of newer research on thirst that keeps on coming in again and again. And there are different theories explaining why do we feel thirsty, how do we see that why thirst is important, why water is important. So there are these different kinds of theories helping us understand why we drink water. However, it is not the same level of it has not achieved the same level of understanding by researchers as much as we have with hunger. Now, because another important understanding is that hunger has been associated with eating disorders. Hunger has been associated with a lot of more easier mechanisms to understand than has thirst. We're going to look at both as to what we will explore more. Now, the molecules act within specific circuits that integrate multiple signals in order for complex decisions to be made. We are not going to look at such complex behaviors. We are going to understand them more simply, but we are going to look at how different molecules act to send in information and to receive information. So just think of these as like messengers giving you information and taking information about the different needs that are to be met. Okay, so up until now, when we are trying to, sorry, just one second. So when we are basically looking at motivation, what we are trying to understand is there is a particular need, and we are going to act in a way, in a goal-directed way, to reduce that need. That is it. Simple understanding of motivation. We are going to look at biological factors or biological motives that exist into us, where these are the basic motives of food, water, sex. Social interaction has a very is a broad categorization of when we're looking at biological, but we try to look at more in terms of psychological needs for the individual. So therefore, we do not always add them into biological needs, and they are regulated by certain internal molecules that could be enzymes, peptides, hormones, and neurotransmitters. So this is what we are looking at up until now. Okay, we don't have to look at this. We're going to look at we're going to look at thirst. Now, with thirst, one of the most important factors for us to understand is that now all of you know that our bodies are made of 70% of water, which means that water is present in our cells and outside our cells. Okay, and what water does is it helps balance the amount of enzymes molecules in and out of the cell. Everybody knows that cells are semi-permeable membranes, which means that they allow certain things, they don't allow certain things. So they help keep the balance within the cell and outside the cells. When we feel thirsty, it's usually when the water from outside the cell is gone away. Right? It has been dehydrated because we are out in the sun, all of that has been used up, and therefore there is less water outside the cell than inside the cell. What this does is, because there is an imbalance, all the water from the cell is being pushed out now. So therefore the cells are shrinking, and therefore they need to send information to the body saying that we need more water. So this is what is called as osmoreceptors, where they are basically receptors sending information about the lack of fluid or water that is outside the cell, and then that is what is happening. So a desire to drink appears when there is a fluid loss within the cells, and then they are pushing that water outside. So what is happening is when the water is pushed outside, there is less water within the cell. To create that balance is then when it basically will send signals to our brain to basically hydrate. Okay, so this is what we are looking at. This is one of the, what you can say, the simplest mechanisms to understand how this happens. And we also see that there are certain cells in the hypothalamus that play a very important role. So what this does is, now what happens is there is a, when the body gets lower level of water, now this is one understanding of it, that when there is dehydration, this is what happens. However, when the body gets less water, the hypothalamus increases a particular hormone, and because of that increase of that hormone, when it gets secreted by the pituitary gland to the kidneys, it again has to drink more water for it to be consumed. So another way that we understand this is that when the body is low on water, the hypothalamus increases vasopressin. Now we remember last time we spoke about vasopressin and we spoke about oxytocin as being controlled by the hypothalamus. This, because it's controlled by the hypothalamus, it is then secreted by your pituitary glands and it travels to the kidney. Again, last time when we looked at hormones, we understood that hormones are something which are sent through larger canals. They are not sent through narrow tubes, they are sent through larger canals. So therefore it causes the water to be reabsorbed from the urine, thus reducing the urine flow and conserving the water, which means that when there is less water in our body, our hypothalamus is signaling our body to conserve more water. So therefore a lot of people also do not always feel thirsty throughout the day, because the signals sent are not always are sometimes controlled by your hypothalamus. So one way is there is this osmoreceptors which are present in the hypothalamus, which basically tells us that there is less water in the cell, and it tells the brain that we need more water. And another thing is that hypothalamus then signals the pituitary gland to send in information to the kidneys via the hormone called vasopressin to conserve the water that is present. So therefore, just by normal logic, when you are dehydrated, you also don't pee. So why are we not peeing is because of the fact that we need to conserve the already present liquid in our body. So these are some things that we are looking at while we are understanding the role of how thirst as a regulation occurs in our body. There are a lot more complicated understanding of thirst. See, a lot of times what could also occur is that if there is a kidney failure, a lot of time this happens, right? Like when there's a kidney failure also, an individual has to, you can also see that there is a problem in their urinary you can also see there is urinary incontinence, which means that they can pee without having control over it, and there can also lead to excessive dehydration, which can actually kill the person, by the way. Now what happens here is that water is just by nature itself is also able to balance the amount of salt content in our body. If there is excessive salt content in our body also, that is excessively harmful for us. Now what is happening here is that if there is less water in our body, and our body or our hypothalamus or our pituitary gland is not able to signal our kidney, or our kidney is not able to receive that information, it thinks that we are hydrated, however we are not. So what is happening here is there is excessive loss of fluid even when we are not consuming fluid, or it is not able to retain that water. That water is responsible for most of our cell function. So if 70% of our entire body is filled with water, it is important for all the cells to function in what you can say, to have an homeostasis for the entire cell to function, for all the cells to function. And when it does not occur, at that point of time there is less and less water in the body, more dehydration, which can make the person feel extremely lethargic, which can give no energy to the person. And please also understand, water not just balances out the entire fluid, but also actually helps you reduce toxins in the body, remove toxins from the body, and also helps you balance like the basic level of the blood brain barrier as well. And if none of that occurs, then at that point of time, if you can also see here, there could also be high blood pressure, because the water is not able to balance the amount of blood brain barrier, which could then again cause an individual to again actually get high blood pressure and die. So having excessive dehydration is very, very bad. Now what happens with dehydration? All of the salts that are also present in the body, which are responsible for managing the system, let's just say in that way, are also depleting. So that's why when any of you have food poisoning, what do? We usually also take ORS, we take salts. So we are not just rehydrating our body with water, but we're also giving it the necessary salts that are important for us to balance the loss of fluid that has happened in the body. So this is why it's very important for us to understand the role of thirst as a biological mechanism. So all you need to know is the role of hypothalamus, the osmoreceptors, and the vasopressin, and its role with how it helps the kidney to retain or remove water. Okay, that's what we're looking at with thirst. There are a lot more what you can say signals that we are going to look at, where within thirst, just give me a second, where within thirst we also look at so many other factors. तो अभी ये हमने देखा है, it's a very biological mechanism of understanding how our body is giving us signals. But there are other signals also that are important for us to know, where we need to understand with regard to thirst. So the first thing is that one is the circadian time. Now everybody knows that when we are looking at like even if we don't feel thirsty, right? Most of us know that if I've not had water for the past 5 hours, I'll just have water. It's not something that has to be taught. It's something that most of us know. So that is also something where we just understand our body requires it. So that is something that is very important, that we have learned over a period of time. And you also see that the level of water you consume throughout the day as opposed to night also changes, which means our body also understands the difference in what you can say, the biological needs that change throughout the day, which means that most likely, even if you most of us do feel hungry at night and do feel thirsty at night, but not as much. A lot of us feel more thirsty throughout the day, because that's where we are also using more of our energy as opposed to the night. So that is also something that we know, that our brain knows when we are no longer in that cortical arousal state. The next, we also get thirst signals up from the taste of water, from swallowing, from dryness, temperature, and ingestion of food. All of these things also give us what you can say signals about whether we are feeling thirsty or not. Again, we looked at kidneys, circulatory system. We are not going to look at all of this. However, if you see like a very simple understanding, I said that the water outside and inside the blood brain barrier, as well as when we're looking at the salt content, all of these within the circulatory system also give you an understanding of whether you are hydrated or not. Again, we looked at the signal that is given to the hypothalamus, if the cells have less water. And also there are other things such as the feelings of thirst. When we also suppress our food or appetite, we also drink more water. And we also see that the individual might also for example, let's just say that a behavior which is more water seeking is a behavior where an example is that you know you're going on a trip and you know you need to drink more water so that you don't have to drink water throughout the trip, something like that. So if you're fasting throughout the day, you probably drink water just before that, enough water, so you think it lasts for you throughout the day. So these are also some other responses where we see when we're looking at all of these signals. So as you see, there are a lot of internal internal signals, not just these basic mechanisms that we looked at, which are biologically motivating the individual to look at thirst. Are there any questions up until now?
No, ma'am.
Cool. So we'll take a 5 minute break and then we'll start with hunger. We're not left with a lot with neuropsychology of motivation. So we'll take a 5 minute or 10 minute. Okay, we'll take a 10 minute break and we'll come back and we'll be doing neuropsychology of hunger.
नहीं खा लिया मैंने आपसे भी पहले बताओ
Could you let me know by giving me a thumbs up if you're back? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So we were looking at thirst, and now we're going to move on to understanding a little bit about hunger. So I'm sure a lot of us have anyway heard about what do we understand by our brain processes. Sometimes we've heard of some hormones that are associated with hunger, and also certain brain areas that are associated with hunger. So we've looked at just a second. We've looked at different centers of the brain that give us information about hunger. Whenever we look at an individual, it's very unlikely that we will get to know whether they're hungry or not. However, we know that the hypothalamus is one of the regions in the brain that is associated with hunger. So here, it basically there are different levels of changes that happen in the hormones secreted by the hypothalamus, which are associated which give us information or give information from the intestines to tell us whether we are hungry or we are not hungry. So basically, if our body has a lot of energy or is rich in energy, then we see that the role of the satiety center or the ventromedial hypothalamic nucleus plays an important role, which means that now we have enough nutrients to not eat more. However, when our body is poor in energy, that's where we see the role of the lateral hypothalamus, where we are looking at the hunger center as being more important um, when we are trying to understand if we need to eat more. So, how does our body get to know that there is more energy or there is less energy? One of the ways in which we get to know is because of the amount of glucose that is found in our blood. Okay, and or it could be that the blood, or if there is higher amount of concentration of glucose in our blood, that could give us information about the fact that there is more of glucose present. Now whenever there is more glucose present in our blood, it leads to an increase of an hormone called insulin. I will repeat it again. So, whenever we know that our body is high in energy, it is because there is a lot of, or there is more amount of glucose present in our blood, or the amount of glucose present in our blood is high. Now, what happens when there is high amount of glucose in our blood? There is a release of an hormone called insulin that happens. Now, insulin is released because we need to store this glucose. Please understand, glucose is very important because it acts like a energy, what you can say, an energy resource. So, insulin is released to store this particular form of glucose, and this is where we see the role of where, for example, if this insulin then basically binds to the blood that we have, and that is sent to the hypothalamus. So in very simple words, you eat food, right? That food gives you glucose. It's increased in the bloodstream. That leads to the release of insulin. Then there's insulin that is also released in the blood, because understand, insulin is also a hormone. So because it's also released in the bloodstream, it reaches our hypothalamus to give us information whether we need more glucose or we need less glucose. If we need more glucose, then we see that it reaches to the lateral hypothalamus to give more, to make us eat more. And if we do not need more glucose, then we see the role of the satiety center, which basically tells us that we do not need more food. Now, how does the hypothalamus give us this information? They release hormones back into the stream. So as insulin is also in the bloodstream sending information to the hypothalamus, we also see hypothalamus reciprocating by sending these information back to the stream. Now this happens with two basic hormones. Um, if you can see here, I don't know if this is clear or not. Just give me a second. This can increase. Just hold on a second. So if you can see here also, there are two basic hormones that are secreted by your hypothalamus, both of them from two different areas. One we looked at before itself, we looked at the lateral hypothalamus, right? The lateral hypothalamus, which releases a hormone called as ghrelin, ghrelin. So it releases the hormone in order for us to keep on eating more and more, right? So we have ghrelin, which is released again back to the hypothalamus from the hypothalamus to make sure that we consume more glucose and there is more insulin released. However, when there is satiety, which means that there is enough amount of glucose and enough amount of insulin, there is another hormone which is released, which is called as the leptin. It is called as the leptin, which is nothing again here. If you can see, it is in the ventral medial nucleus, ventromedial nucleus of the thalamus, and it is released in order for us to stop eating and feel full. So when we feel hungry and when we feel full, this is also something which is mediated by these molecules or by these hormones released into our bloodstream by our stomach, by our intestines to the hypothalamus, and also information or hormones sent by the hypothalamus to our intestine and our bloodstream, which is via ghrelin and leptin. Okay. Do we have any questions up until now? Okay. So if you can see here, just a second. If you can see here, your lateral hypothalamus releases ghrelin and your ventromedial hypothalamus releases leptin, which basically acts like a satiation center, which means that we no longer need to consume anything. Okay. So this is when we are looking at the basic understanding of or basic mechanism of hunger. Now we are going to see the role of hunger when we are trying to understand eating disorders. Just give me 1 minute. An important thing to note. Now, one of the most important things for us to note when we are looking at hunger is there are two important systems at play. One important system of eating is through the system that we looked at when we were looking at ghrelin, leptin, or it is also called as the homeostatic system, which is nothing but in order to maintain a drive for the arousal, that is something that keeps on happening. There is another system that operates, which is called as the reward system. Now, obviously, all of you have heard where we've heard about Skinner's rats, where even after they're full, they would press the lever to eat more and more. So this is where we are not talking about the homeostasis of being, for example, consuming food, but it is more of a rewarding thing here. So it's not just one system that plays a role in hunger, but we also have this reward system that very highly influences how we consume food. Now, this reward system plays a more important role, especially when we're talking about eating disorders, because rewards are something which could very more likely be associated with certain external factors. External factors could be that, for example, increase of weight, which probably could be associated with individuals' body esteem, and therefore controlling the amount of food I eat, or it could also be that I really don't feel nice, so therefore I consume more food, which could also be seen in individuals using binge eating to cope with problems. So that is where we're also seeing this reward system playing a more influential role than a homeostatic system that we looked at, especially this biological system that is present into us when we are trying to look at when we're trying to understand this regulation or this eating or understanding of eating and hunger. So therefore there are certain environmental, genetic and hormonal factors that play an important role. Now, if you look at this, one of the most important understanding of the reward system comes from something called as the reward pathway. Okay. Now, this reward pathway is where you have four important regions. You have your prefrontal cortex, you have your ventral tegmental area, you have your nucleus accumbens, you have amygdala, and you also have the lateral hypothalamus. Now, you don't have to know any of these regions. You just have to understand that the reward pathway may also the lateral hypothalamus is existing. Now, please understand lateral hypothalamus was also secreting ghrelin. Okay, so it also makes you more hungry when there is a reward system. So it's not just your homeostatic system, but it is also your reward system which is activated. So a lot of times, especially if eating is more more environmentally influenced, we can also see both the pathways being activated, which could also see an increased consumption of food even without the individual's will to actually consume it. So a lot of times individuals with binge eating disorder actually do want to stop. However, because we see the lateral hypothalamus playing a role in the reward circuitry as well as in the homeostatic system, we see that there is more difficulty in actually stopping that eating behavior. So it's not just it's a behavior thing, but it's also a circuitry thing that has been learned over a period of time, because the lateral hypothalamus is also a part of the circuit. Now, if you see, the reward circuit also has your prefrontal cortex and also has amygdala, which means that individuals who feel more emotion, especially negative emotions, are more likely to also consume food, where we also see it as a reward system, and not always consume more food. It could also be as a form of punishment to hold back from food, to not reward an individual and see it as not as a reward for getting something. So a lot of times, if you see, a lot of individuals with with disordered eatings will use food to either reward or punish themselves. This is also somewhere over, obviously, environment, culture, but it also sometimes becomes an internal circuitry mechanism. So this is where it becomes more difficult. So even when you work with clients who will have disordered eating and they know they want to change it, however, this difficulty has happened because over a period of time we know that our circuits learn these patterns, and therefore, because it's associated not just with homeostasis but with also reward systems, that is where it becomes a little bit more problematic for us. So we see the role of the reward circuitry or the reward pathway as well as homeostatic pathway. Now, when we're looking at the hypothalamus, because we look at it as a maintenance system, if you also see, hypothalamus is also called as the coordinator of the pituitary gland, because hypothalamus also gives information to the pituitary gland to act in certain ways. Now, pituitary gland again has a lot of major hormones, regulation of hormones that are controlled by the pituitary gland. So you already looked at the ventromedial thalamus and we looked at the lateral hypothalamus. However, you have another important region of the hypothalamus which is called as the paraventricular. Paraventricular, which is basically the region where it includes thyroid, cortisol and oxytocin. It controls thyroid, oxytocin and cortisol. Now, if you can see, therefore, cortisol is released when there is excessive stress in the individual. We also see we also see thyroid as playing a very important role when associated with stress, when associated with growth. We also see thyroid playing a very important role in regulating all of the other major hormones as well. And we also see oxytocin as saying like the good or the positive hormone which is supposed to create positive feelings, which means that if there is activation of the hypothalamus, we can also see that nearby if there is a problem in the activation of even one hormone in the hypothalamus, every other hormone is affected because they're all interconnected. Now, this could be that the signal to the hypothalamus is not reaching properly, which means that there is a circuit problem, or it could also be that the hypothalamus is defective, where it could be a lesion or it could be over a period of time just this activation of only one particular form of circuitry. So a lot of individuals who actually have thyroid as a problem, you also see that they experience their level of cortisol is also extremely high because it is affected, which means that the level of stress they experience in the body also decreases the level of immunity they have. So individuals with thyroid and excessive form of stress are more likely to get immune system problems than individuals who have a proper or normal controlled thyroid and high level of stress. So if you can also see how comorbidities work, where if an individual who has thyroid and more likely to also if they're also more likely to eat more, they have more disordered eating than individuals who do not have thyroid. So all of these hormones have to work in regulation for eating to not be disordered. So especially individuals, I know a lot of now there is a interaction of nutrition with psychology. It's become like a big thing now, where we also look at how disordered eating is understood within nutrition, where this might play a very important role for us to understand how biologically systems are affected in individuals, for us to psychologically look at eating as a pattern. Because if we are not able to understand this, I know a lot of people, especially with PCOS, also have problems with eating. So this again, we look at not just with the homeostatic system, but also with the reward system of how we look at our bodies and how that reward circuitry works for us. So very important for us to consider all of these systems. You don't have to know it in as much detail, but it's very important for us to look at. Now, within the reward circuitry also, it basically is the reward circuitry is based on the idea that we look at food as a form of reward, or also we look at food as pleasurable, which means that if you remember, there are certain areas in the brain that secrete dopamine, right? Here in the reward circuitry also, we have this area called ventral tegmental area, which secretes dopamine in the reward circuitry. So therefore, when you eat food and associate it with a pleasure, we're basically looking at food as a reward and not as a drive. Okay, which means that let's just say you're really hungry and you grab a burger. However, you're like, should I also have fries with it? Probably you don't want it, but you want to eat it. So that is where it's not homeostasis, but is the reward circuitry, because you like having fries. So that is where we're looking at an excessive form of consumption that could also be seen, especially with binge eating disorders. So that is something which is very important. Now, yes, Afri.
Ma'am, excessive consumption in terms of healthy items or like unhealthy food, like is there a distinction?
Okay. Usually, when we look at healthy and unhealthy, I don't think as individuals who do not come from nutrition we can decide what healthy unhealthy is. However, it usually so there is a good understanding of healthy and unhealthy. Even if you consume excessive healthy food, it is unhealthy. Excess of any
Yeah.
healthy food is also unhealthy because it's no longer needed in the system. However, what is rewarding to you? So let's just say that would you want to eat like 3 bowls of salad, or would you want to have like 3 serving of rice? So it's what is rewarding to you will influence the reward circuitry, and not necessarily what we look at as, oh, is it healthy or unhealthy. Does that help you understand the difference?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yes. So that is where, if you also see a lot of nutritionists do say that, oh, consume a lot more of it. But in the end, if the association of food is only with becomes excessively with rewards, which means that people only eat. A lot of times, I know individuals with disordered eatings who are like, I will not eat throughout the day. I will only eat once if I do this, or only if I work out so much will I eat this, which is nothing but you are no longer meeting your primary need, but you're looking at food as a sense of reward. So that is also something which is problematic, by the way. When we're trying to fix our food, sorry, when we're trying to fix our food habits, especially with clients who have disordered eatings, we no longer look at food as rewards. You have to change the way client look at food as rewards. You have to change the way into looking at them as like basic drives. So the function of food becomes very important than when we are looking at other things. Okay, and this is for all body image work. All body image work starts with function. It does not start with appeal, attraction, reward. Okay. Okay, so one of the most important things we also look at is a lot of individuals who experience obesity. We also see that it has been seen that they have a very high level of leptin resistance, which means that they are more resistant to being satiated. Therefore, they are more likely to consume more food, which is again a biological, a genetic thing. And therefore we also see obesity is more genetic in nature than it is because of a lot of other factors. Obviously a lot of other environmental factors do play a role, and we also see that with obesity, along with genetics, we also see a very high level of environment and reward systems that could also be seen. But we also see that there is higher level of resistance to leptin that is seen, and it's not just usually motivation. So you remember there was a show called The Biggest Loser, where they used to like take individuals with obesity who were excessive, who were of very high weight, and actually ask them to compete and lose weight, and somebody who loses the most amount of weight would win that show, apparently. So in that show, they saw that it was not motivation, but a lot of other biological factors that make sure that the person was fat. And it was one of the things that was seen in individuals who experienced obesity was this leptin resistance, and not as much as individuals not motivated to lose weight. So that is also where these understanding of obesity becomes very important for us, because we also see that there is an increase of that throughout our generations, especially uh, when our basic diet has also become very different. Um, we also see this in individuals who experience depression, where individuals who experience depression, especially individuals who have chronic depression, it has been seen that they also have a higher amount of resistance to leptin, and they have the same genetic, what you can say, risk factors of obesity. So individuals who have chronic depression also have the same genetic risk factors associated with high resistance or obesity related leptin resistance. So there are same genetic factors that are being seen in individuals. With anorexia, another important thing for us to notice is the reward system. Again, coming back to reward system, um, Sorry, Padmashri, I missed your question. Could leptin resistance be developed over the course of life, or is it always genetic? Usually, it is always genetic. However, over a period of time, if you see that usually if you're all born with something called as a set point, which means that most people, like let's just say आप दो रोटी खाते हो, दो ही रोटी खा सकते हो, ठीक है, तो हमारा set point है how much we can eat. However, that goes up and down based on certain factors. Again, reward circuitry plays a role. But over a period of time, if you are an individual who even feels full after two rotis, but you keep on consuming more and more over a period of time, you are now training your body to become more resistant. So it's not just that we are like the signals that we're sending are also changing. So over a period of time, if we do change this, it could also be seen. However, a lot of individuals who overeat experience acid reflux, experience digestive system problems because it goes beyond our resistance of what we need to eat. So therefore we have other systems such as the excretory system that plays a wonderful role, and the digestive system which plays a wonderful role to balance our systems out. However, over a period of time, if we increase that set point, then there could be more leptin resistance. But it is something which can happen again because of a lot of factors where we excessively consume because of let's just say like of the reward system also. But it's very unlikely that it is going to be present in an individual. Sorry, it's very likely that it's going to be present in the individual genetically. So that is something that is. Babies that are overfed have a huge appetite. No. Okay. Okay. So one of the things that when we talk about overfeeding is that there is a difference between overfeeding actually and what the amount of overfeeding is. For example, for a child, let's just say that if it's a new, let's say 6-month baby, then giving like 1 bottle of milk is not overfeeding. Right? However, if you give them 2 bottles of milk or 3 bottles of milk, that is overfeeding. So अगर आप बच्चे को खिला रहे हो, I know a lot of people do that where they give 1.5 roti to like a 1-year-old child, which is quite a lot, right? Or they could give 1 roti, but if it's a small roti, it's not overfeeding the child. And a lot of times overfeeding causes a lot of other problems in the child, such as digestive problems. You do not increase resistance here. There are more digestive issues, there are more excretory issues. The child will throw up more likely, or the child will become aversive to food. So we don't see leptin resistance as much. We see more resistance in terms of what you can say, we see more resistance in terms of when we're trying to actually see how our systems are trying to accommodate to this excessive amount of food. So the resistance doesn't change, it just the kids deal with it in different ways. So they become aversive, or their digestive systems become like try to see. So that's why if a child is overfed, they're more likely to throw up, because that is not what you can say, that is not digested. The things that are not digested do not go, do not become glucose, do not send signal, do not become resistant. That makes sense. Cool. Yes, so we were at anorexia. With anorexia, one of the most important things to understand, again, plays a very important role in reward system, where we see that the reward system here is of fear, right? I'm fearful that I will gain weight. I'm fat and I will gain weight, so I will have to keep on losing weight. I will have to keep on losing weight. So here, that is something that happens, which means that even though the individuals might feel hungry, the motivation to eat does not exist. So because of the excessive amount of fear that they have, which like operates their reward system, they are able to control or overcome this physiological drive of eating. So a lot of the individuals who have disordered eatings actually feel very hungry in the start. If you start any diet, okay, any of us, if we start any diet, you might feel excessively hungry, but you're like, jane de, I will have to not eat, I will have to not eat, or I will have to only eat this. But over a period of time, you learn how to control that, because there is another motive. So in anorexia also, this is something that is happening, where there is a malfunction where actually the reward system takes over the actual homeostatic system, where now we are operating our needs only through this function, through the system, and not through actual motivation to eat. So if reward system takes an excessive role, then our homeostatic system takes a back seat. Now, again, with bulimia or binge eating, it's the opposite, where again we have an excessive form of impulsivity, where we can also see faulty reward system, where even things such as cues regarding food, okay, can make or can actually activate the reward system in individuals. So even if they're shown an image of a burger, there it has been seen that their images sorry, there is an activation of the reward circuitry. Even there is such high association within the circuitry that is seen with individuals who have who have binge eating and bulimia. Another important fact to notice here is also the prefrontal cortex plays a very important role. Now, what happens when prefrontal cortex plays an important role? It is our inhibition center also. So it is telling us that, hey, listen, I need to inhibit, I don't need to inhibit. With bulimia, with binge eating, if the if the inhibition is also a problem, that is also something that is seen. Just sorry, just give me a second. I need to charge my laptop. Okay. So for now, I think this is enough for us, because I think we can take one topic a little bit more easier than the others. Others are, we can take them in way more detail. So for this topic, again, very quickly, I will do a quick recap. When we looked at thirst, we looked at osmoreceptors. We also look at the role of hypothalamus and the role of the hormone called vasopressin, which plays an important role in giving information to our kidney regarding retaining of urine and dehydration within the system. The next we move to hunger, where in hunger we try to understand the role of the hypothalamus by the secretion of ghrelin and leptin to our stomach or digestive tracts to give us information whether we should eat more or we are satiated. Along with that, we also have the reward system that plays an important role. So these are the few areas that we need to keep in mind while we are looking at neuropsychology of motivation, because we are just looking at hunger and thirst. Along with that, an important concept would be what is motivation, what are drives, what are needs, what are incentives, and the motivation cycle. Do we have any questions regarding this for now? Okay, cool. So we can just quickly take attendance and then we can end class. Just give me. Okay, can I please get your attendance? Aarti, Aditi, Zilnaz, Aishwarya.
Ma'am, Aditi present.
Okay. Anmol. Okay. Aarti is present. Okay. Anmol. Bhumika. Janki.
Present, ma'am.
Shripriya.
Present, ma'am. Present, ma'am. Apurva, present, ma'am.
Okay. Ariana, Jenny,
Ma'am, am I audible?
yes. What Apurva? Jenny, Hiral,
Present, ma'am.
Misbah, Shivangi, Afra,
Present, ma'am.
Mansi, Dhwani,
Present, ma'am.
Alfia. Why can somebody please mute this? I'm not able to hear. Thank you. Alfia, Nisha, Ayushi,
Present, ma'am.
Komal, Vasti, Yukta, Afri. Okay.
Afrin, present.
Ma'am, you did not say my name.
Sakshi.
No, ma'am, Vaishnavi, you did not say my name.
Okay.
Ma'am, even me, Anmol.
I did say your name, but I think that maybe it was not. There was some network error.
Sorry.
Yes, Sakshi. Sakshi, Ketki,
Yes, ma'am, present.
Nishi, Padmashri,
Present, ma'am.
Nidhi,
Present, ma'am.
Jinkle, Ria,
Yes, ma'am.
Ridhika, Samiksha,
Present, ma'am.
Omi,
Present, ma'am.
Tavi,
Present,
Sakshi,
ma'am.
Sina, Prachi, Soumya, Drumi. Yes, Ria, you were. Drumi, Shivani, Shaheen, Faraz,
Present, ma'am.
Purvi,
Present, ma'am.
Pareen, Shreya, Sonal,
Present, ma'am.
Zainab, Taruna, Unnati, Da, Darshi,
Present, ma'am.
Ayushi, Prachiti,
Present, ma'am.
Vaibhavi, Yashi. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I got all of your attendance. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.